Hi, my name is Mohsen Mousavi. I'm one of the co-founders of PANIXEL and creator of UnFound. About 15 years ago, I got into the visual effects industry. I started as an artist and later I became a visual effects supervisor. Through the years, I've worked with some very known director. I've worked with Martin Scorsese and HUGO. I've worked with Roland Emmerich on the Independence Day 2. And last year, I supervised Game of Thrones season 8. I supervised the final 3 episodes of the final season of Game of Thrones. I have a very demanding job, and sometimes I work with 300 to 400 artists, and we work together on some very challenging technical, creative, or sometimes organizational challenges. About 8 years ago, I watched a documentary called The Indie Game, a beautiful documentary. I really highly recommend. It motivated me, inspired me to want to become a game developer myself. So that very weekend, I downloaded Unreal Engine and I started to learn. And I wanted to share with you a bit of my challenge and what I went through the last 8 years, and particularly and my experience in the visual effects field helped me through this process. Unfound is a tactical driven stealth game with modern mechanics and gameplay. Every puzzle in Unfound can be solved in a number of different ways, and you can choose to solve the puzzle based on your own game style. You could be going around the guards, sneak around the guards, or you could be using the guards to your advantage to sort of solve the puzzle. In terms of the environment, we wanted to make sure that the environments are rich. We have a lot of details, but at the same time, it still has that minimalistic look. We wanted to make sure that every level has its own sort of color palette, using as much as we can complementary colors, and making sure that the colors in the level are sort of conveying the story and setting up the mood based on whatever level you're at. In visual effects, when you work on a shot, you don't start right away jumping into a final version of the shot. You go through a whole process, and usually it starts with something called layout, or even before that, something called the previs. It's the blueprint of the shot, it's the foundation of the shot. As you're working on the layout, you might have some other artists in a different department in parallel working on the assets themselves. Now, the layout is a very high level, low detailed version of the shot. And in a lot of ways, this is similar to how you approach level design in games. You don't go right into building a very rich and advanced environment. You start your level with very simplistic assets, and you try to have something that you can quickly prototype, tweak, and adjust, and most importantly, test and make sure that the puzzles are working, and make sure that the level has its own flow. And as you're working on the layout, someone else might be working at the same time on the assets and the textures and the models. Now, me working on all of this on myself alone, I've been working very hard to create that discipline to make sure that even though I'm the one person approaching all of this at the same time, obviously at different days, I wanted to make sure that I go through the same process. I really forced myself into, today, you're the layout artist. And I would give myself notes. I would make sure that I'm very critical of my own work. And the next day I would be the modeler or the texture artist. And I would make sure that I am working on the level as a whole. I don't get focused too much on one aspect of it, and sort of have the luxury of jump around enough to be able to, when I come back to the same problem, look at it with a fresh eye. Another topic that is very similar between visual effects and game development is analytics. When we work on visual effects, it's very different than games. In games, everything is real time, and everything is sort of processed right at the spot. In visual effects, everything is done offline, meaning that nothing is real time. Everything takes a long time to process and compute. Now, you can have a render farm with thousands of servers, thousands of machines that constantly work through these frames and render this very computationally heavy shots. And you need to monitor that. And how do you monitor that? You use something called a render management software. We use something called Deadline that has a dashboard very similar to a lot of the game analytics tool. You're looking at the dashboard to see where the render farm is, how many jobs are assigned, how many frames are getting rendered. And if something goes wrong, you sort of analyze and see, oh, I see that these group of machines that only have 24 gigs of memory have really difficulties rendering these type of shots. So we'll need to sort of intelligently make sure we sort of assign that to a different group of machine. Now, I've learned a lot of this during my years at Visual Effects. I learned how do you manage a lot of data that you are collecting from the system, let it be the tools that the artists are using, or let it be the render farm that you need to constantly monitor and constantly come up with a more efficient ways of using the same farm to deliver the project. So I've used this knowledge in UnFound to be able to set up a lot of analytics measures in many different ways to be able to collect the data from the games. I've been able to collect a lot of different events in terms of tester A has gone through the first level, and this is how the tester A has managed to go through all of the puzzles and has managed to finish the level. I can be very carefully analyzing and monitoring the amount of the time that the tester has used the inventory, what type of inventory he has used, how often did he sort of save before he got to the end of the level, how often did the tester use his very specific item in the level, and what was the flow of using of the items, what was the order of the events. And when you sort of look at this data through your testing process with the analytics tools that you have implemented, this noise, this sort of collection of data gives you a whole different perspective of how you could optimize and change the flow of the level and make your game experience a better experience. So I've learned that learning this from visual effects and understanding the necessity of analytics is something that is a very, very valuable experience. That if you're in that field, if you're in the field of visual effects and you're hoping to merge into the gaming industry, make sure that you learn that part really well and pay extra attention, because it can become very, very handy. Next topic, I wanted to talk about task management and scheduling and the review process. In visual effects, something that is very, very, very common is that you go through this whole loop of looking at a version, give some feedback, the artist's work goes back to his desk, doesn't update based on your feedback, and you look at another version the next day, and you go through this process over and over and over till you sort of get the desired effect. And when you go through this process, when you work with 300, 400 artists, and it becomes a very complex system to sort of record this information of what type of task are we creating, and what are we tracking in the system to be able to not to go crazy and still have an overview of what is really happening. So I've learned a lot through the years of how to organize a project and how to break it down into smaller tasks. On a project in visual effects, you could easily have 15 to 20,000 tasks of a variety of tasks. Could be technical, creative, or it could be very organizational sort of tasks. But you'll learn how to put this into smaller container and how to organize this in a way that it's quantifiable and you can measure it, if that makes sense. So when I got into more serious in terms of game development and started to getting into a larger variety of tasks, knowing that I'm alone at home and I'm doing a lot of things at the same time. I could be the developer, I could be the modeler at a point, I could work on the game design, I could be working on the music, sound effects, I could be working on the marketing aspect, I could be working on the website, you name it. There's a lot of things that you go through as an indie developer. And I found that a lot of the indie developers, they don't take that too serious to really establish a serious tool that can help you with the task management. I don't believe into writing it down on a paper, because it's not possible to track this complexity in a piece of paper. You need to use metadata and tags and a lot of other tool sets that a pen and paper won't give you. So at work, we use a tool called Shotgun, and this is very, 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 very common in the visual effects industry. It's a tool that organizes your task, it organizes your shots, it organizes your schedule. You can create dependency, you can create a feedback loop, and so on and so on. At PANIXEL for UnFound, I use a tool called ClickUp. It's an amazing tool. I've gone through the years. I've tested over and over and over a number of different tools to see what is it that can give me what I need. It doesn't have to be as complex as the Shotgun that we use in visual effects, but it needs to sort of cover most of my needs. And after testing a lot of different tools, including Trello, I came up with something called ClickUp, which is an amazing tool set. In ClickUp, what we do is that we have containers for different part of the development. We have the game development, we have perhaps the marketing aspect, we have the website, we have let's say section for releasing the demo or the beta, and then within those sections we come up with a lot of different tasks. As I'm developing, I might be coming with new tasks. I quickly go into the system, I write into that section, and then it all comes down to how you tag it. I might be tagging a task as this is an issue, so it's one tag. It's a visual issue, that's a second tag. It's a visual issue I would like to fix for the demo, and it's something that I have not been able to fix after the first half an hour, right? So I put all of this metadata into every task, and then you sort of click all of these tasks, and after a month or two, or a year or two, you have a large quantity of tasks. And then you start sort of categorizing those tasks into how important they are. Is that really something you want to fix, you have to fix, or was that more because you wanted to add that extra feature into the game? And then you start prioritizing your day and your week and your month based on this metadata that you have put into the system, based on the priorities that you have set, and you go through it very, very carefully. Now, you want to have a system that you could open on a Monday morning, have a look and say, what is it that I need to do to be able to release the trailer, for instance? Or what is it that I still need to do to be able to release the demo? And then I get a collection of 40 tasks, and I literally look at those 40 tasks and I start going through them. Sometimes you have the luxury of working on whatever you want, and that's I think the biggest difference between working at home and working in a visual effects facility with 400 other artists. And having a task system like this helps a lot. So again, another big luxury of learning that through my years at the visual effects industry, to really understand that the logistics of the process of filmmaking is as important as the technical and the creative aspect. You want to make sure that your game design is not compromised and your creative part of the game is not compromised because you were messy and you were not organized and you sort of lost track of what you wanted to work on. So highly recommend that you guys make sure that you are implementing a tool like ClickUps or even Shotgun. You could use Shotgun for game design as well. The next topic I wanted to talk about is consistency. It is really difficult to work on any project that takes a year, 2 years, 4 years, 8 years. It's a lot of time. Now, that doesn't mean I spend every day in the past 8 years working on UnFound. As I mentioned, I have a very demanding job, and sometimes I might be working on a deadline for like 5-6 months. For instance, when I was working on the final season of Game of Thrones for the last 6 months of the project, I was working pretty much 24/7 on Game of Thrones, and I didn't have a minute to spend on anything else but the project. And sometimes I go on set. I went to New Zealand. I was on set for, worked in a movie called The Meg. I was visual effects supervisor on a big chunk of the movie, and I was on set for about 4 months. So I had to, put a pause on development of UnFound. And I've had this up and down a lot. I've had a lot of chunks of my time in the past 8 years that I just didn't had the bandwidth to work on the game. Now, when you go through the process, and I believe that's something that a lot of people deal with. I believe that a lot of the indie developers who might have a day job deal with that. The key to that, what I have learned is the consistency, is to be able to really break down your task to the level that if you break your development for even a year and you come back to it, you can pick up where you left. And that's very difficult in any development, in any creative or technical process. If you don't organize it enough, you make a break for a while, you come back to it, you don't know where to start, it can be a very frustrating thing to deal with. So what I have learned in visual effects, which is a very similar process, in visual effects, something is called, you put a shot or a sequence on hold. It might be because the studio is trying to rewrite the story. Maybe the director is not happy with the edit and they're trying to re-edit the movie, but you might be putting a number of shots on a hold for maybe 6 months, maybe 5 months. And what is really important is that you want to make sure that you have done everything in place correctly so that once the time comes and the shot goes back in progress, that the team is not scrambling with where did we left off and what was the story and how are we continuing. So you're not spending another 2 months just to get to where you left off. I've learned a lot of that during the visual effects, and it would have been very, very difficult if I was not using tools like ClickUp, tools like Shotgun at home, tools like OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, to sort of organize my own work. And I wanted to sort of come back after 6 months and pick up where I left. So consistency is a very important thing that you learn through any creative process, if that is visual effects, if that is concept design, if that is music, and as well as if this is game development. So highly recommend to make sure that if you have to go through that process, you keep your work, you keep your organizational aspect of the development very, very consistent. And I hope that you will be one of the guys who is hoping to switch from maybe visual effects or any other creative industry into game design and into game development, and maybe you're struggling to make that decision, I want to make sure that I have told you it is absolutely possible. I haven't switched. I still have my day job. I still work on a large project at work with a lot of people, but I have found the right balance to have my day job and use the expertise I have learned there through the years, and use the same expertise into making a video game. Thank you very much.